Welcome to the Life of Hair. My name's James Atkinson. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode. Now, this week's episode is all about backcomb balayage technique, or chatouching, or teasy lights, or whatever you want to call them, whatever name somebody makes up for these techniques. Basically, backcomb balayage technique. Now, lots of the questions that I get asked are when and where do we use these techniques? And it's really, really simple for me to answer this question. Generally speaking, if the client wears their hair dead straight all the time, then a backcomb balayage technique is a fantastic technique, as you'll see in this video, to create the ultimate blend from their existing natural colour into their pre-existing lightener that they've already got in their hair, pre-existing bleached ends, or creating a total new look. So I think for me, when we look at balayage versus ombre versus all these different techniques, where it stands out for me is that with your balayage techniques, there's always contrast in the end. So there's the natural colour or a dark colour and the light colour mixed together, which looks really beautiful when the hair's curly or wavy. But if the hair's going to be worn completely straight all the time, then I feel like there needs to be some continuity. Either ends all need to be the same colour more or less, or only a few strands of hair that are similar to the natural. We don't want to create big contrast because it would just look a bit strange, a bit stripy potentially towards the ends of the hair when it's worn poker straight. So they're things that you really need to think about. And I would love you to jump into the comments and give me your thoughts on balayage versus ombre and where you use different techniques, because I'm just showing you what I do. You guys are great hairdressers too, I'm sure. I've seen some of your work on Instagram. You guys do some wicked things, so wonderful to get your guys' opinions and feelings, because this is a hairdressing community. This is not about me dictating to you how to do things. So on that note, thank you very much for leaving those comments, those thoughts, those feelings. It's much appreciated. Hit that thumbs up button, subscribe if you haven't done that yet. All of those things massively support the channel, and it's really, really been going wonderfully over the last few months. And that's not just me making videos, that is also you guys doing all of the things that I have just mentioned. And on another note, as well, as I always mention in every video, you know what it is. Thank you to all my Patreons who are supporting the channel by joining my Patreon, where we do live tutorials either once or twice a month for either $4 or $10. And not only do those guys contribute to their own personal education and have direct access to me through Q&A sessions, send me questions, but they are also massively helping me on my journey to grow my digital business, not just for you guys on YouTube, which actually they do contribute to. New lights came from some of the money earned from that. And reinvesting that money is something that is really, really important to me, and making this a digital network where people can grow their businesses to make more money behind the chair. That's the end of it. That's all I want people to do, is to make money, and for clients and people to be happy with their hair, because at the end of the day, it's a real confidence booster. Anyway, I digress. I talk too much. I know some people tell me in the comments, but I do love you guys, and I much appreciate everybody who comes along to contribute to this community every single week. So until next time, look after yourself, stay safe, stay sane. Speak to you soon. So as I mentioned in the intro, this is a backcomb, chatouching, balayage, foliage, baby lights, you name it, whatever you want to call it, technique. And we're starting with an old colour through the ends. I did this colour probably 7 months ago, something like that. Back at the start of the year, and it's time for a refresh, just to bring up the exact same thing higher up the head. Now, with these type of techniques, I'd say lots of people talk to me about, how do you remove the backcombing, James? How do you take out that backcombing once you've backcombed? And the trick to backcombing a balayage or a chatouching or whatever you want to call it, I don't know what we're going to call it. We're just going to say backcomb balayage from now on. is that we don't want to go in too hard with our back comb. Now I'm going to do a video on the differences between back combing styles. I don't know when I'll do that, but I've got it in my pipeline for things to do. Now, the thing about creating these kind of back comb balayage techniques is obviously you're pushing hair from the ends and the mid shaft to further towards the roots to create diffusion, to create pieces of natural hair that are up by the root that don't get bleach applied to them. So when those hair come down, so you do need enough hair up at the root, otherwise you won't get the diffusion required. But equally, you don't want to put too much hair up there because one, you'll create a big ball at the roots and that's hard to get out. And two, well, you might have more hair up there than you wanted. So probably one long consistent stroke from the either mid-lengths or the tips all the way up to the root, and just if it gets stuck, just gently tease it up towards the roots. Be really, really gentle, and your back combing will come out much, much easier. In the particular instance of this client's hair, I'm using a clay lightener. I'm starting in the back with 20 volume, and I will work to 30 volume in the front sections. This is so that it all processes relatively evenly, and actually this technique doesn't take a huge amount of time. I am going through every single section on her head, but even so, it's less time than a full head of highlights. It's around 1 hour and 10 minutes for even this quantity of hair. And actually it doesn't look like a lot on this particular video, and I keep thinking to myself, it doesn't look like she's got a lot of hair, but she's one of those clients with fine hair and tons of it. So it's not a long-winded technique, even if you want to do every single piece of hair. But bear in mind, I always do prior consultations to ensure that my clients have got the ample time with me to get the results that they want. And that is super important. For those of you that don't do prior consultations to your colouring services, you will know that sometimes clients come in with really unexpected things, expectations beyond reality. Prior consultations, even if it's just a Zoom call, even if it's just a Skype, a FaceTime, it doesn't matter. Just something so that you can see exactly what you're going to be dealing with and book out the allocated amount of time necessary. Listen, we should always skin test in our clients anyway, so while we skin test, it'd be a really good idea to catch a look at their hair and make sure that we're all on the same page. You saw that I popped a little clip in at the roots. Now what was that all about, you wonder? Sometimes when you go to paint the hair, because you apply the brush to the hair and drag down towards the ends, it can pull out some of the back combing. And that putting a little clip in at the root area is a really good way of holding the back combing in at the roots to prevent it from coming out. Some people's hair is more susceptible to slipping out of the back combing than others. And what it means is that you don't have to push loads of times to get loads of the hair to stay at the roots with friction. You can just do that simple, long, gentle tease towards the root area, pop your clip in, and the hair will stay in situ. That is a really, really useful thing when it comes to not needing to kind of back comb so the hair stays in place. Now when we look at a back comb balayage technique, or a technique like this where we're applying straight onto foil, any technique that we're applying straight onto foil, where the hair is going to be thicker than a highlight section, something we really need to bear in mind is the fact that the saturation gets all the way through the section. Poor saturation will ultimately lead to patchy results. So make sure you really work across diagonal, side to side, and get the product worked into the hair so that you can ensure that you're going to get the best lift. Now working with foil is a good idea in most cases, but it does have its limitations, and it does have places where it does and doesn't work. In this particular instance, it works amazingly. But what I hear a lot from people is about heat amplification. Now, heat amplification is relative to metal, I appreciate, and aluminium foil is a metal for sure. But when we think about heat amplification, the scalp, or the heat resonating from the body, is 36.6 degrees. That heat only dissipates from the body for around 1 centimetre to 1 inch. Obviously the temperature can rise, but that usually means they've got a temperature personally, and in this day and age with COVID, let's hope they haven't come in with a temperature. But what we look at is the foil is not touching the scalp in this particular instance. So all it's doing is preventing the bleach from drying out inside the foil. That is when bleach is at its least efficient. What we really need to do is keep the bleach working for as long as possible. And by covering it and not allowing the air to get to it, that is where the bleach will work for its maximum amount of time and do the best possible job of lifting the hair. One of the things that I see when I'm teaching, when I'm going to salons, when I'm helping people with their hairdressing journeys, is that they don't put enough bleach on, especially if they're air processing, so scalp bleach, freehand balayage technique, all those kind of things. They always undersaturate the hair, not in every case, but in most cases. Alternatively, when they cover the hair, they still tend to undersaturate. So when we look at the hair and the hair that we've just painted bleach onto, what we want to be really aware of is that the saturation is heavy enough that we cannot see the hair that we have bleach on. It wants to be covered, like you would put icing on a cake. You can no longer see the cake unless it's one of those very trendy modern cakes, and that doesn't apply. Let's think wedding cake, royal icing, thick, get it covered. The more you put on, the better it will lift. End of story. Even if you're covering it with foil, cling film, easy mesh, doesn't matter what you're using, get the product on. Now when we're doing highlights, obviously there are some pitfalls with putting loads of products on, but this isn't highlights. And this technique, you can just get as much product into that packet as you humanly can. It will help you in the long run. It will develop more evenly and faster. So you will note there, and on each section, I'm just taking around an 8mm in depth section, and then I'm cutting the back of that section, just a fine slither of hair, just to remove a little bit of the natural, to leave a little bit of contrast and depth in between the sections. That doesn't happen every time, but it's just a case of me not wanting to overload the root area. I don't want it to look like a set of grown out highlights, because remember guys, this isn't a set of highlights. If we wanted it to look like that, we'd just do normal highlights. We want a little bit of a natural / grown out, very soft, beachy look from these type of finishes. So we do need to remember about contrast in all balayage, or what I'm going to start calling all these techniques under one umbrella is lived in blonde. You've all heard this now, I'm sure, on the internet. Is kind of one of these words that's floating around. It's something that I really just think encapsulates the whole strata of balayage techniques. So let's just talk about the crown area. I've left out a little triangle in the crown area, not a big triangle of hair. And if my hands weren't in the way, you'd see it much better. But basically what I've done with that triangle is I've split the bottom off the triangle, leaving a very small triangle of hair with our depth piece. And then I've done exactly the same thing. Sliced it in half, back comb, put my foil in. And I've done that on both of the sections in the crown area. A really, really straightforward thing to do. I always try and work that crown area in that triangle section. It's just a really easy way of attacking that triangle, because otherwise you end up working up to tiny little sections in the top corner of each of the left and the right hand side. So that's something to bear in mind. You can pre-section that off before you start if you want to. You'll have seen maybe that on some of my other videos where I will take that section and put it out of the way. I also do it when I'm cutting as well, because it's quite a strong growth pattern area and the hair can fall awkwardly, so it's really good to tackle it individually. So when we're working through the sides here, we're going to change our tact slightly. We're still going to work straight up through. We're going to keep our sections on the diagonal. Now, For those of you that are not aware, diagonals create softness, and the reason that they create softness is because they distract the eye. Vertical lines create length, so if we see something that's vertical, our eye is drawn from the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top. Horizontal does exactly the same thing. As soon as we see a horizontal line, our eye is drawn across the horizontal line. We want to see where it finishes. But a diagonal line is a more confusing line, and our eye is caught by the top, by the bottom, but because it's diagonal, it's a little bit more difficult for our brains to process. And so therefore, that is why using diagonals when we're colouring is a really, really beneficial thing for added blending without any extra work. So again, as we come up to the top of the head or the parietal ridge here, we are working with a very small triangle again. We're not going to do anything special with this particular triangle. We're going to carry on as normal. These are the areas on the head that get asked the most questions about from people in the comment section. How do you deal with the crown? How do you deal with the parietal ridge? Not everyone calls it the parietal ridge, but they always say the top of the section. So I always like to try and include that in there just so you guys can see exactly how I manage that particular section. I don't pay particularly special attention to them. Maybe the crown area is probably the area I pay the most attention to because it's an area that can lay awkwardly. But certainly when we come up to the top of these sections, all I do is make sure that I finish the section. I work all the way through, even if that means I have to put a tiny little foil in these side sections specifically. So we're on to the top section now, and this particular top section we're going to work in a very much my favourite highlighting pattern, which is called Herringbone, and it basically works diagonally across the head. So you take a section that would mirror the hairline at the front and you work your way back towards the crown area. Now on this very, very front section, I'm painting right up to the hairline. It's not a money piece. It's just a case of putting the first few in really high up. As we've done on a lot of the sections, it will be a little bit blonder, a little bit lighter around the front. I don't feature it at the end of this video specifically. I always forget to film money pieces. I get so many comments about, oh, you didn't film the money piece. I mean, I have in a few. I don't know why I do that. But anyway, in this particular instance, don't worry about me. I'm just rambling. Taking exactly the same premise on each of the sections, taking a diagonal section relative to the parting. So if the parting was in the side, which it is on this particular instance, it's on the left hand side, I am working diagonally across that parting to diffuse any lines. This will create maximum softness and give me the best blend through the parting. Because one of the things we need to think about is if we work horizontally through the parting, when the hair is then parted, we create stripes because each section is effectively a slice of hair. Irrelevant of whether we backcomb or diffuse or whatever we do to it, if we're working horizontally, we need to be very, very mindful that we are going to split that hair and create vertical lines in the hair. So by changing the angle of attack to diagonal, as I mentioned earlier, will increase the softness in this particular area and it will improve the overall look generally. So it's really worth trying, if you've never tried it before, to change the angle of attack, especially going through the parting. The other thing we can do is we can work horizontally up to the parting, and this would give us maximum coverage with the minimum amount of effort. We do need to bear in mind though, we either want to be putting lots of colour into the hair or not very much at all. Because if we work up to the parting and we want to see colour in that parting, we better be getting the colour bang on the parting. The only problem with that though is if the parting moves, which it does when the clients do their own hair, we won't really be able to see the colour. So when the only time I work right up to the parting is if my foils are virtually back to back. And that is the only time that I would do that. So just bear that in mind for the future. Oh, and before anybody comments about how long these foils are, these I didn't rip myself. These were foils that I found laying around in the salon that somebody else had ripped. And I am a big fan of using up all the old foil that's just laying around. Waste not, want not. Takes a lot of the environment to make foil, so I feel like I should use it. taking into account how the hair falls naturally on your client prior to putting in, especially a natural lived-in blonde technique, is a really important thing. Look at how the hair will fall when the client wears it themselves. Do they have a high crown, a low crown? Does their crown split? Does the back of their head split? Does the hair grow in a particular direction and fashion that means that the hair is going to live in a particular place? Because we want to try and get the colour into the hair to best match the natural fall. So always spend a minute or two trying to work out where the hair falls naturally before you start any freehand or balayage or any of these particular lived-in blonde techniques. It's really, really important. And if you don't do that already, then take some time to try and look at how the hair falls naturally, and it will most definitely improve your next balayage. And here we have the hair in situ, foils in, ready to process. Now this particular processing time will be up to 50 minutes is because the manufacturer's recommended time. As I said, 20 volume in the back, 30 volume in the front. And it has lifted an absolute peach. As we can see here, super blended through the back there, and lots of people say, what does the back underneath look like? Obviously that's what you guys want to see. Hairlines in the nape, all those kind of things where the hair is hidden, I guess. But as you can see, this technique works beautifully for creating super subtle blending around those hairlines in that nape area, as you can see from the video. We tone this technique with Redken Shades EQ 09V, 09GB and equal parts crystal clear just for the ends. So we took the level 9, we stretched it all the way down towards the ear, and then we blended that into the 09GB, 09V and crystal clear just for the ends, and just gently blended the two together. Nothing technical, just to create that little bit more of a creamy blonde travelling towards the ends. And it was all about kind of keeping the contrast down at the roots because she didn't know when she'd be back again, so we wanted it to last as long as humanly possible, maybe another 7 months. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you have, please do me the massive favour, hitting that thumbs up button, subscribing if you haven't already, sharing this with your friends, all of those wonderful things that really help the channel out. I would be massively grateful if you did all of those things for me.